Hello and welcome to our weekly look inside Syria. I'm Hazem Seeker. It's been a week of manoeuvring on the diplomatic front, but with little to show for it. On Monday, Syria's Foreign Minister Walid al-Muallim said the government in Damascus is ready to talk to armed opposition groups in an attempt to end the violence. Walid al-Muallim also said President Assad and his allies are open to negotiations, but he didn't say under what conditions. The Syrian foreign minister had been meeting Russian officials in Moscow, but opposition leaders remain sceptical. While on Wednesday, the opposition Syrian National Council attended crisis talks in Rome. That's after saying earlier it would boycott the Friends of Syria meeting. The group then backtracked after the US and Britain promised more aid for rebel fighters. And on Thursday, for the first time, the United States said it will directly help the Syrian opposition fighters. The new Secretary of State, John Kerry, announced that his government will send food and medical supplies to the fighters. But there will be no weapons and no air support.
I am proud to announce that the United States of America will be providing an additional $60 million immediately in non-lethal assistance to support the coalition in its operational needs day to day as it continues to organize and work for the political transition that we all want to see.
But our main focus in this week's programme is the role of Hezbollah in the Syrian conflict. Over the last few weeks, the Free Syrian Army has accused the Lebanese Shia armed group of fighting on behalf of the Assad government. Reports have also been published in several Lebanese media that say it's playing an increasing role in the Syrian conflict. Hezbollah has denied any allegations of military involvement. At the same time, has also made it clear that it supports the Syrian government while calling for dialogue and reforms. For years, Syria was an access route by which Hezbollah was able to acquire support from its main backer, Iran. The Syrian regime aided and supported Hezbollah's resistance to Israeli occupation and so was considered an ally despite their differences. Its leader, Hassan Nasrallah, said, "Until the moment we have not fought alongside the Syrian regime, it has not asked us to do so." But later, he said, if there ever comes a day when our responsibility demands that we fight in Syria, we will not conceal that. But there is no such thing at the moment. Well, similar accusations have also come from the US Department of the Treasury. In a statement issued in October, it said Hezbollah has provided training, advice and extensive logistical support to the government of Syria's increasingly ruthless efforts to fight against the opposition. Hezbollah also played a substantial role in efforts to expel Syrian opposition forces from areas within the country. So joining us now to talk more about this are our three guests. In Homs via Skype, Abu Rami, spokesman of the Syrian Revolution General Commission. In Washington, D.C., Raoul Marc Guerect, a senior fellow at the Foundation for the Defense of Democracy. Mr. Guerect is also a former Middle East specialist at the CIA. And in Beirut, Kamel Wazni, a political analyst and a professor at the Lebanese University. Mr. Wazni is also the director and founder of the Center for American Strategic Studies in Beirut. Good to have you all with us, gentlemen. Raoul Marc Guerect, if I could kick things off with you. As a former intelligence man, what do you read into these reports of Hezbollah involvement in the Syrian conflict?
Well, I mean, I think you would expect that. I mean, the Iranians, for example, have been quite explicit in their support and their involvement in the country. We know that an Iranian general, the Revolutionary Guard Corps, has died in Syria. Given the importance of Syria to the Iranians, given the importance of Syria to the Hezbollah so far as a conduit, a lifeline, it would be shocking if you didn't see the Hezbollah involved in Syria. It's in their interest to do so. It's obviously in the Iranian interest to do so.
But the fact that we seem to be hearing more of this now over the last few weeks and months, do you read anything into that?
Well, I think it's a sign of Iranian desperation. The real truth is that the IRGC and also the Ministry of Intelligence in Iran has relatively few good Arabic speakers. Arabic is really only properly taught in the clerical schools in Iran, so Hezbollah would be an essential linguistic link in its efforts to help the Syrian regime, and I think we're just hearing more about it because the Syrian regime is obviously in greater trouble than it was 6 months back.
Kamil Wesley, if these reports are to be believed, what are the implications then of Hezbollah sending fighters to Syria to fight against the rebels?
Well, obviously, the story about Hezbollah sending fighters to fight against the rebel, this is what is taking place. It's on the Lebanese border, and there's 25 towns. Those historically on the borders, mostly there are Lebanese, and they reside inside between Lebanon and Syria. And the fighting that is taking place on those 25 towns, which is resided by about 30,000 people, mostly Lebanese, this is what they're talking about, Hezbollah involvement in Syria. There is no doubt Hezbollah is a large supporter of Bashar al-Assad, and in my estimate, Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah declared when and if been asked by Hezbollah, they will consider the support. But I think at this point, I don't think Hezbollah have any involvement in Syria except on those towns which mostly the inhabitants of these towns are defending themselves because they're mostly Shiite and live on that area for hundreds of years.
Well, why do you think that? Why do you believe that Hezbollah's involvement doesn't go beyond those border villages, as you say? Because there are also more specific reports, Kamil Wesley, that say that Hezbollah fighters have been recruited to fight alongside Syrian army soldiers deep inside Syria. What do you make of that?
I think there's a lot of claims here and there, but there is no concrete evidence that Hezbollah is fighting in Syria. And I think to this point, I think the Syrian handling the situation to a certain extent, and you will see casualty from Hezbollah if this happens. So far, all the indication, if any tension between Hezbollah or confrontation is happening in these towns. I don't think it's in the interest of Hezbollah to be involved in a Syrian conflict. This is very difficult conflict, and this is does not, I think, in my estimate, Hezbollah will not put himself in a situation where they fight directly against the Syrian up to this point. But in the future, we have to wait and see, and so far the Syrians haven't asked for direct help, and most of the talks and actually the fact that they say Hezbollah is inside Syria, this is we heard it from Mr. Kerry, we heard it from a lot of American officials, we heard it from maybe the opposition in Syria, but there is no merits to that statement, to my understanding and to my knowledge.
Abu Rami, you're inside Syria. Have you seen evidence to support these claims that Hezbollah fighters are in the country?
Exactly, and we have seen it a lot and many times ago, especially recently, a month ago in Al-Qusayr, we have, as one of your guests said, that there are many towns are putting on the borders between Syria and the Lebanese borders. And these towns, these villages are according to the Syrian territories. So most of them, like Jusi and other villages, inside in these villages are Shia and some of them are Sunni. But Hezbollah fighters are trying to snake inside this Shia and trying to fight and attack the towns which is already between the hands of Free Syrian Army in Al-Qusayr. And we have seen a lot of clashes between the two sides. And Hezbollah party said in about 2 weeks ago that members of his group were killed in the Lebanese borders. This is what means that there is already clashes between the two sides. But I think, and we have seen that the Syrian people are trying to defend themselves, no matter how, no matter who is the people who are fighting them, or they were Iranian, or they were from Hezbollah, or maybe another member. So we we take and we hold the full responsibility on the Lebanese government to take a stand to stop these violations on the borders between Syria and Lebanon.
Raoul Mark-Irect, Hezbollah is essentially a Lebanese resistance group. It is a partner in the Lebanese government. So to that extent, it has a stake in the stability of that country. So does it risk further stoking tensions then, the more involved it gets in trying to defend Assad's regime in Syria?
Well, I think that Hezbollah's primary concern is to maintain its lifeline to Iran. Syria really is the only Arab ally of Iran. It's been essential as a conduit to the Hezbollah. It has been an important ally of the Hezbollah. So I think its primary loyalties are there and not to the Lebanese Sunni or Christian communities. So Hezbollah has a vested interest in seeing the Alawi continue to rule Syria. Whether they change their calculations later because of the predicament that the Alawis are now in, and if it appears that the Alawis are going down, which I think that would be a little bit premature at this point, you might see Hezbollah try to renegotiate itself. But I think it's fair to say that if the Sunnis triumph in Syria, the Hezbollah is going to be in a very, very difficult position inside of Lebanon.
Well, let's talk a little bit more about that then with Kamel Wazni. If this regime falls, what will Hezbollah look like as an organization? Will it be a different organization?
No, I think Hezbollah is determined to carry with his mission, with his objective. He claims that he's a Lebanese resistance. His purpose is to defend Lebanon against any Israeli incursion or attack. And I think Hezbollah will, as Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah said a couple days ago, he has all what it needs to continue that resistance movement. Obviously, if the calculation of the region change, this is not going to be good for Hezbollah, because Syria is a very major, important ally for Hezbollah and Iran. And obviously, any changes in the geographic area will affect, the organization in maybe in a way that probably they have to think differently about how they go about their positioning in Lebanon and the struggle that they have against Israel. I think, but it's too early to say if the Syrian regime will fall and Bashar al-Assad will leave power. I think this is what we heard just today, at least from the Kremlin. Maybe the situation needed to started to look differently today, because maybe we could see a political maybe a solution for the situation in Syria. In my estimate, it's too early to predict how the Syrian situation will change before we can say what's going to happen to Hezbollah if the regime falls. The Syrian situation seems it's a long way to go before any solution can take place.
All right, let's move on then to the talks in Rome earlier this week between U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry and the senior members of the Syrian National Coalition, the opposition group, and the Friends of Syria. John Kerry announcing that the United States has for the first time agreed to directly supply Syria's opposition with $60 million in non-lethal aid. And if I could turn to you on this, Abu Rami, I'm sure you welcome any and all aid that is given to your group, but surely $60 million is an insignificant amount for an opposition that is now expected to operate like a government in some parts of Syria.
Yes, actually, we have heard many times about this kind of aid for our uprising. But if we want to talk about the kind of necessary assistance that we need, they are not the dollars or not the money in its means. We need some specific weapons to defend ourselves and to make the huge difference between the group of FSA and between the army of the Syrian regime. And recently, when in the coalition and in Rome, they said that they will send lethal weapons also to the Syrian revolution. This is an lethal weapon. What will be useful for us? I think it will not be useful for us. And also, this amount of dollars and amount of money are only useful for those people who are refugees now outside Syria. We already said that we need this kind of help, but in the other side, we need another kind of help to improve the movement of the FSA on the ground. We have heard a lot of news, and you know already that the Free Syrian Army is moving towards inside the capital of Damascus. The most parts of Aleppo are inside the hands of FSA, and the other parts of Syria, I think the final move will be by to improve them by this kind of weapons to end the battle for the Syrian people.
Raoul Marcorrect, while this money is needed, is it likely to immediately change anything on the ground?
No, I don't think so at all. And I think the administration is, talking this up because, as the president has made crystal clear in the past, he has no intention of supplying weaponry to the Syrian opposition. So this is simply another way to avoid that discussion and to give the suggestion that, in fact, the administration is doing something to aid the opposition while avoiding the much more problematic, difficult discussion about sending
So this is something really
weaponry.
more symbolic than anything else, in your view?
Yes, absolutely.
But does the United States risk further destabilization of Syria? Because, I mean, the thinking is that they are reluctant to provide any further aid because they don't want it falling into the wrong hands, namely some of these so-called jihadist groups. But the other fear is that there is a power vacuum that these groups are exploiting.
Well, I think that's certainly true, but I think the administration's primary concern here is for the United States to stay out of another conflict in the Middle East, to essentially continue the American withdrawal from the Middle East. So I don't think whatever the death toll is now in Syria, whether it's 70,000, 100,000, or 150,000, I don't think that's going to make any change in the calculations of the president, who seems quite intent on not having the United States become a party to this conflict.
Cameron Wesney, what do you make of this decision by the United States?
I think the United States, after what happened to their ambassador in Libya, it has to be very cautious about Syria. The New York Times reported a couple of days ago that one Arab country bought weapons from Croatia, and they were sent to Syria through Jordan. And there is report that there is a lot of training been supplied by Persian Gulf countries. I think the United States have to be, in my estimate, have to be cautious because they think there is a lot of terrorist group, especially Al-Nusra group, that the United States put it on its terrorist organization, and they are afraid that Al-Nusra has the upper hand in Syria, and it's going to be problematic for the United States in the long run. Some people in the United States don't want to see Afghanistan or Somalia in Syria, probably like to see the end of the regime of Bashar al-Assad, but nobody wanted to see, I think, the emerging power of the Islamists or jihadists or Al-Qaeda, whatever you want to call them. I think the President of the United States is very cautious about that because he will be held responsible, as we saw the process with his first nominee for Secretary of State, which she has to withdraw her nomination because of the wrong statements on the assassination of the ambassador in Libya. I think a lot of people see Syria going into the disintegration, and that's very dangerous for the region. Maybe we hope that we see a political process that brings Syria back and find a way to bring the people together, because the battlefield does not solve any crisis. Actually, it continues destroying the country and the livelihood of the Syrian people.
Let's move on now to the growing refugee crisis in Syria. The United Nations expected to announce this week that the number of Syrian refugees has passed 1 million. We'll talk more about that in just a moment. But here's the story of one man, in his own words, who fled from Syria last year and hopes to go back someday.
I am Syrian writer Nihat Series from Aleppo.
Noise derived from the foul verb to make noise.
The Silence and the Roar is talking about the life in a country ruled by dictator. Every dictator needs people to love him and to say that they love him. The difference between democratic leader or authority and dictatorship. Everyone knows that the revolution in Syria started very peacefully, but the killing insisted. No one wanted revolution in Syria, no one at all, but they were on streets because they were against killing, against violence. Of course, I have family in Aleppo, and I really worry about them. For the future, I hope to see the two sides sit to compromise. I am engineer, and I am ready to go back and stop writing and to help in rebuilding the country.
Abu Rami, as someone who is there on the ground in Syria, give us a sense then of just what the situation is like for Syrians and for those who have been forced to leave.
Well, exactly like what we heard lately, his words was very true. What we are first came out in our uprising was against unfair and against killing, to stop killing. We were peacefully at the first time, but when we were shocked when we faced by live bullets and arrested people and etc. You know, then the revolution turned into a group of people carry weapons to defend themselves. Of course, I am talking to you now inside Homs city. Most of these people inside Homs now, they are refugees outside Homs, maybe in other cities or outside Syria. In general, we talked with them, and they said they are now in in a bad situation out there, but they are likely to be like this, better than to live under the control of this dictatorial leader, Bashar al-Assad, and his rest of government. He considers Syria as a farm for he and his family. But now those people, they're likely to prepare.
Just in the minute that we've got left, I'll give the last word to you, Raoul Marc-Correct. The longer this conflict goes on and the people of Syria continue to suffer, doesn't that put more pressure on the United States to act?
It does, but I mean, so far it has not been a politically losing position for the president to essentially ignore Syria. So I think things would have to get significantly worse in Syria before the president were to change his mind.
All right.
You have to remember, given his opposition, if he changes his mind, people are going to ask, why didn't you change it sooner?
Thank you to all of our guests in Homs via Skype, Abu Rami in Washington, D.C., Raoul Marc-Correct, and Beirut, Kamel Wezni. And thank you for joining us. Remember, Al Jazeera has extensive coverage of what's going on in Syria, not just on this program, but our on-the-hour news bulletins and online at aljazeera.com.